All right, so you want to talk about geopolitics and markets in 2025. Buckle up because this deep dive is going to be a wild ride. We're going deep into this article you sent, Geopolitics and Market Dynamics in 2025. A deep analysis.
Catchy title.
Right, and it doesn't disappoint. Germany's economy, not as stable as we thought. Trump's back with trade war round two. And then there's the whole Iran situation.
Yeah, and the thing is, these issues, they're all tangled up together, you know? Like, take Germany, for example.
Everyone thinks they're like the rock of Europe.
Right, stable, strong economy. But it's not that simple.
Hmm.
The article talks about how they're trying to shift away from their super strict fiscal policies, always got to have a balanced budget.
Decades of that, right?
Exactly. But now it's like they're realizing, hey, maybe we haven't been investing enough in our infrastructure, social programs, and it's hurting their growth now.
So they're trying to loosen up a bit, spend a little more.
Yeah, but it's causing some serious internal friction, especially with the Green Party getting more and more influential.
Their environmental policies, they're not cheap.
Nope. Pushing for renewable energy, it's driving up energy costs for businesses and consumers.
Ouch. And I bet that's not doing their relationship with Russia any favors.
Bingo. Germany needs that Russian gas, but the Greens are all about reducing dependence on it. So it's a geopolitical headache on top of the economic one.
Talk about walking a tightrope. Their article also mentions pressure on Germany to up their defense spending. They might even need to change their constitution for that.
Yeah, after World War II, they put some serious limits on military spending in their constitution. But now, with all the tension, especially with Russia, there's this push to beef up their defenses, both from within and from their NATO allies.
And if they want to spend more on defense, they got to change the constitution, which is a huge deal. The Green Party's not exactly known for their love of military might.
Definitely not. Their support is crucial for any constitutional changes, and you can bet they're going to demand some major concessions in return.
Like stricter environmental regulations, maybe a bigger focus on diplomacy instead of military solutions.
Exactly. Germany's at a crossroads, trying to balance economic growth, environmental goals, and international pressures.
It's a mess, and if Germany sneezes, the rest of Europe catches a cold. Speaking of global players shaking things up, how about Trump? Round two of the trade wars.
Yeah, and he's not holding back this time.
The article says it's not just China anymore. Europe and Canada are in the mix now. And he's not messing around with negotiations. Tariffs are already hitting steel and aluminum.
It's like he wants to completely rewrite the rules of global trade, put America first, no matter what it does to other countries.
And how's that going over with everyone else?
Well, Canada's not backing down. The article quoted Ontario Premier Doug Ford saying, "Zero tariffs or nothing." They're not budging.
Strong words. This could blow up into a full-blown trade war pretty quickly.
Right.
And if Europe and China team up with Canada, that's a whole lot of economic pain for everyone. But while we're on the topic of global markets, there's that whole OPEC plus thing.
Yeah, OPEC Plus deciding to increase oil production, kind of out of left field, right?
Yeah.
Everyone was expecting them to hold steady.
So why the sudden increase? The article suggests it might be connected to a potential U.S.-backed Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear program.
It's a theory, for sure. Maybe they're trying to preemptively offset any disruptions to global oil supplies if Iran gets taken out of the equation.
That's a bold move. It's almost like they're betting on conflict. And then there's Russia. They're a big part of OPEC plus 9, right?
Yep. And they seem to be on board with this production increase, which makes you wonder if maybe there's some kind of backroom deal with the U.S.
Like some kind of geopolitical chess match where everyone's making these calculated moves. What does this mean for Iran?
They're already hurting from sanctions, so if their oil exports take a hit, it could get a lot worse for them. More instability in the region, maybe even a bigger conflict.
Okay, so we've got Germany struggling, Trump stirring the pot with trade wars, and the possibility of things going south with Iran. Is there any method to this madness? Is there a bigger strategy at play here, especially with Trump?
Well, the article tries to make sense of it all. Trump can seem unpredictable, but there are some patterns emerging.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are you seeing?
First off, he's all about shrinking government spending, cutting taxes, just like his first term.
That's classic Trump.
Right. Second, he's putting the squeeze on companies, even foreign ones, to invest big time in U.S. infrastructure and manufacturing.
Like that thing with TSMC, the Taiwanese chip maker, having to build plants in the U.S.
Exactly. He wants those manufacturing jobs back in America, less reliance on foreign supply chains. And then there's the third thing. This is where it gets a little controversial.
Let's hear it.
He seems to be prioritizing control over valuable resources, oil, minerals, stuff like that. And he's willing to use aid or political support as leverage.
The article mentioned Ukraine, how he's supposedly angling for control of some of their natural resources in exchange for backing them up against Russia.
Yeah, it's a very transactional approach, America first, no matter the cost.
But is it sustainable? He's picking fights left and right, trade wars, military interventions. It's a risky game he's playing.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's high risk, but also potentially high reward. If it works, he could put America back on top, reshape the global landscape to benefit the U.S.
But if it blows up in his face,
It could destabilize everything, alienate allies, trigger more conflicts. It's a gamble, and to make things even more interesting, the article predicts the next 45 days are going to be extra wild.
why is that? What's coming down the pipeline?
A couple of big things. First, there's this Supreme Court decision that might limit Trump's ability to use foreign aid as a bargaining chip.
So less leverage to push around countries like Ukraine.
Right. More checks and balances on his power. And then there's the whole Iran situation. The article suggests that a U.S.-backed Israeli attack on their nuclear facilities is a real possibility, and it could happen soon.
Wow, that would definitely shake things up. So basically, the next 45 days could determine whether we step back from the brink or dive headfirst into chaos. It's a lot to process.
It is, but even with all this craziness going on, there might be some opportunities hidden in there, especially in the financial markets.
That's what I'm really curious about. How do we make sense of all this and figure out what to do with our money?
Well, the article has some ideas about that. We can dig into those more in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good to me. I'm ready to uncover those hidden gems and get a better handle on how to navigate this financial roller coaster. Okay, so we've got this whole global situation laid out, but I'm still trying to figure out what it all means for someone like me, someone who's not a geopolitical expert.
Yeah, I think that's a common feeling these days. It's a
Yeah.
lot to take in, all these complex issues, especially when they seem so connected and, global.
Right. It's like this giant puzzle where the pieces keep moving around, trade wars one minute, potential wars the next, and then the energy markets are all over the place.
It's a good analogy. That's why it's important to break things down. We've started by looking at Germany, Trump, OPEC, plus Malarize. But to really get it, we need to go deeper, see the bigger picture, the trends, the motivations.
Okay, so where do we start with that? What are some of the big things shaping this whole geopolitical landscape?
One of the biggest things is this shift to a multipolar world. For decades, the U.S. has been the big dog, economically, militarily.
The world revolved around America.
Yeah, but that's changing. Other powers are rising, China, Russia, even the EU as a bloc.
So it's becoming less about America calling the shots and more about a balance of power.
Exactly. And that makes things a lot more complex, a lot less predictable. It's not just the U.S. dictating the terms anymore. You've got all these players with their own agendas. Sometimes they clash, sometimes they cooperate. It's messy.
And we see this playing out in so many ways, right? The trade wars, the potential conflict with Iran, even Germany trying to figure out its place in all of this.
Exactly. The trade wars are a perfect example, the U.S. trying to flex its economic muscle, but China and others are pushing back. Then you've got Iran, where Russia's involvement adds a whole other layer. And then Germany, they're trying to balance their own interests with being part of this globalized world.
It's like this multipolarity is the background music for all this drama. But what about the motivations? What's driving all these different players?
Well, with Trump, the article argues that it's all about make America great again, but through a very specific lens. He sees the world as a zero-sum game. One country wins, the other loses, that kind of thing.
So basically, it's economic nationalism, putting America first, even if it means breaking the rules and upsetting relationships.
Exactly. And that approach is definitely shaking things up, creating uncertainty and instability. The tariffs, pressuring companies to relocate to the U.S., even the talk of military action, it all comes back to that worldview.
And how about Russia and China? What are they after?
Well, Russia, under Putin, wants to be a major player again. They're challenging the U.S. in places like Eastern Europe, the Middle East. They're also teaming up with China to counterbalance American power.
So they're playing the long game, trying to rebuild their influence in this new world order.
Exactly. China, on the other hand, they're focused on economic growth, becoming the leader in technology and innovation. They're investing like crazy in infrastructure, both at home and abroad, with things like the Belt and Road Initiative, and they're going all in on tech like AI and 5G.
So they're taking a more subtle approach, but just as ambitious, right? Not necessarily head-to-head with the U.S., but positioning themselves to be the top dog in the 21st century.
Exactly. It's not all about conflict, though. The article talks about how important cooperation is, too.
Right, because as much as these big players are competing, they also need to work together on certain things.
Absolutely. Climate change, pandemics, cyber threats, terrorism, these are things no one country can handle alone. They need to share information, coordinate efforts. It's ironic, even as they're competing, they also need to collaborate.
So it's not just conflict or cooperation, it's both at the same time, depending on the issue. It makes things really hard to figure out.
Exactly. That's what makes this geopolitical landscape so tricky. You can't always tell who's on which side or even what the sides are. Alliances change, interests align, and then fall apart. The rules are constantly in flux.
It's like we're all in the same boat, whether we like it or not.
That's a good way to put it. In a globalized world, we're all connected. What happens in one place affects everyone else. Through the economy, the environment, security threats, it's all intertwined.
Okay, so we've established that the world's getting more multipolar, that big powers are competing and cooperating, and we're all connected. But what does this mean for the average person trying to make sense of it all?
That's the big question. And it's one we'll tackle in the next part of our deep dive, where we'll focus on what these geopolitical shifts mean for our everyday lives, especially when it comes to our finances and investments.
Okay, I'm ready for that. Let's get to that next part and see what we can learn. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Germany's Economic Balancing Act, Trump's trade wars making a comeback, the whole Iran situation, and this big shift towards a multipolar world. But let's get down to brass tacks. How does all this global stuff actually affect our wallets?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And the article acknowledges that things are pretty uncertain right now, especially in the stock market. Investors are definitely feeling a little nervous. But, sometimes when things get disrupted, it can create opportunities.
So it's not all doom and gloom. There might actually be some good news hidden in all this chaos.
Exactly. The article points to bonds, for example. Interest rates are going up, the stock market's all over the place, so bonds might be a safer bet right now. They could even do better than stocks in the short term.
Interesting. So shifting some money from stocks to bonds could be a good way to ride out this geopolitical storm.
It's worth thinking about for sure. Always good to talk to a financial advisor before making any big decisions. But the takeaway here is diversification. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, especially when the baskets are a little shaky.
Makes sense. Spread the risk around. But beyond bonds, are there any other alternative investments we should be watching?
The article mentions a few. For instance, with all this geopolitical tension, defense stocks might be worth a look.
Yeah, if countries are spending more on their militaries, the companies that make weapons and military tech are going to benefit.
Exactly. And this is a bit more speculative, but the article also suggests keeping an eye on commodities, especially those that could be impacted by these geopolitical events.
Like oil, natural gas, maybe precious metals, things that are essential but could become scarce or see price jumps if there's a crisis.
Right. Commodities come with their own risks, but they're definitely a sector to watch as this whole geopolitical situation plays out.
This is all super helpful, but I gotta be honest, it's a little overwhelming for someone like me who's not a finance expert. Where do we even begin to make sense of all this and make good decisions?
I get it. You don't need to become a Wall Street wizard overnight. The important thing is to find reliable sources of information, do your research, and don't be afraid to ask for advice from professionals.
So basically, stay informed, be smart about where you get your information, and get help when you need it.
Exactly. It's easy to get caught up in the fear and panic, but we all have the power to take control of our own financial futures.
I like that. It's not about just reacting to whatever's happening, but being proactive, learning, and having the tools to handle whatever comes our way.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the whole point of this deep dive. Even though the world seems crazy and unpredictable right now, there are always opportunities for those who are prepared, informed, and willing to adapt.
That's a good point. It's not about trying to predict the future, but about being ready to deal with whatever the future throws at us.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yes.
And with that, I think we've covered a lot of ground on geopolitics and market dynamics in 2025. It's been a fascinating discussion.
Yeah, we've gone from Germany's economy to potential conflict in the Middle East and how it all affects the global markets.
And we've talked about some practical strategies for navigating all of this, both for our investments and our overall outlook.
Thank you so much for your insights and expertise. This has given me a lot to think about, and I honestly feel more confident about making smart decisions.
My pleasure. Remember, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep learning.
And to everyone listening, we encourage you to do the same. The world's changing fast, but with a little knowledge and some critical thinking, we can all thrive in this new landscape. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll see you next time for another exciting exploration of the world around us.